Hi, and welcome. I'm the Reverend Dr. Cheryl Caver, Presbyterian minister of three congregations in Eastern Ontario, and thank you for joining us for this week's Puzzles in Faith. This week's question is, can God die? Or rather, how can God die? And of course, we're talking about Jesus dying on the cross. Note, we're not dealing today with the question of why did Jesus die on the cross. That's next week's question. But it's simply the question of how can God, if he is who we imagine him to be, how could he possibly die? So the question actually revolves around two basic assumptions. One, as I've stated, is our idea of God. In some religions, gods can die, but not in Christianity. Our idea in God is that he's the creator of everything, matter, energy, time, space, whatever you want, if you can imagine it. God created this. Nothing exists unless God wants it to exist. That's almost fundamental. So if you've got a choice of existence, non-existence, God is here, God is not here, then how can God possibly die? Which leads us to our second assumption. We assume that death is non-existence. And if God it fades into non-existence, then is he really God? And now we've contradicted our understanding of God. And so we've got this horrible situation. And we just basically try to figure it out. Now, over the centuries, we've come up with quite a few answers, as a matter of fact. So let's go through them. The first is Jesus wasn't God. So yes, Jesus died on the cross, but since he wasn't God, God didn't die. Simple answer. A variation of it is Jesus only seemed to die, but he really wasn't physically dead. He basically passed out. So he's buried in this cave, and when he regains consciousness, it may take him a couple of days, but he gets his way out. Okay. And so the question then is irrelevant. Did God die? No, because Jesus didn't die. Or no, because Jesus wasn't God. Needless to say, neither of those answers are satisfactory for Christians, for the simple reason they contradict our basic beliefs that Jesus is God, Jesus died and came back to life. So if you reject either of those two beliefs, then you're outside of Christianity. Okay, so what about within Christianity? Is there a way of saying that, yes, Jesus is God and died, and yet somehow... Okay. And so there's some other answers. One was Jesus only seemed to be human, but he was really sort of a ghost or a spirit sort of walking around and interacting with people. And yeah, he seemed to die on the cross, but really it was just that image, and then he just came back and showed up. So no, he didn't really die. We just thought he did. He seemed to die. And the other one is that Jesus was a human being, and when he was baptized, we had that the dove descended on him. So that was God's Spirit coming on him. So Jesus is human, but he's filled with God's Spirit. And when he's arrested and tortured, God's Spirit leaves him. So Jesus is killed on the cross, and he's done all these miracles with God's Spirit. But God's Spirit has abandoned him before he actually died. So you might have stories of Jesus or God's Spirit hiding behind a stone, sort of the laughing Messiah. Those sort of are within Christianity because you're accepting that there is God and Jesus, but they've been declared heretical beliefs, and I think you can understand why. And they're sort of fall under the label of Docetism, which means it seems. It's a sort of an image. So what does that leave us? In Christianity, we believe that Jesus is fully God and fully human. And also that Jesus, therefore God, did really die. Well, okay, but that takes us right back to that first question. How? There's two things we need to remember. And the first is, of course, we're not God. And let's put it a different way. We are used to operating in a three-dimensional, four-dimensional reality. Height, width, depth, and time. So it's hard for us to grasp anything beyond those four dimensions. Maybe you might say 5 dimensions if you believe in the paranormal, but and if that is a dimension, but that's about as far as we go. But God is so much more. I mean, we're talking about the source of the Big Bang, the source of galaxies, and he created time. He created space. He created matter. He created energy. He operates at a level way beyond our ability to understand. So when he comes into our lives or as a human being, these laws of nature are just doing very strange things. So yeah, he dies from our perspective, but from his perspective, possibly not. From our perspective, looking trapped within those four dimensions, but he's beyond those four dimensions. So we're a finite creature trying to understand the infinite. We're limited human beings trying to understand someone who has no limits. And we're going to fail. Okay? And that's just something we have to accept. But there's another possibility too. I said that you have life and death, existence and non-existence. But what if that's not true? We have a story or a tradition that Jesus spent those 3 days he was buried, that he spent that time preaching to the dead. Maybe maybe death is not non-existence, but a different form of existence. Okay. Maybe when we die, we go from this life to some other kind of life. We don't know what it is, and we don't see it, but it's not non-existence. So if there is life after death, if death is another type of life, then it's quite possible for God to die and come back to life. Because we're not talking about going from existence to non-existence, but from this kind of existence to that kind of existence to another kind of existence. So, to sum it up, how can God die? First thing, we don't know the answer. But we can make reasonable guesses. As Christians, we accept that God is beyond our ability to understand. So it may be possible for him to die and come back. We just don't get how. Also, by dying, coming back to life, maybe God was showing us that death is not non-existence, but another form of existence. And if that's true, then what does life after death look like? And maybe that's a big adventure. But in any case, we do believe that Jesus was God, 100% human, 100% God. Don't ask how. And that he died on the cross and came back. He shifted to a different type of existence if he preached to the dead, and then he came back to the living, showing us that breaking the bounds that we're used to operating in and living within, and opening us to the possibility of so much more in life and in the universe. So once again, I'm the Reverend Dr. Cheryl Gaver, and thank you for joining us for this week's Puzzles and Faith. Take care and have a good week. Bye-bye.